All right, I think we are live. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you wherever you are tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining us here right now. This is, in fact, the last session of the 6-day marathon that GMAT Club has put on, the MBA Spotlight, probably one of the most ambitious MBA activities that I think pretty much any GMAT type of MBA website has ever done. So first of all, congratulations to the GMAT Club team. And for those of you who have been with us this entire week, thank you so much for joining us. And this is the last panel of the week, but I think it's going to be one of the most valuable ones because I think one of the biggest reasons we all apply to business school is to enhance our careers. And for most people, that involves some level of a career switch, whether it's trying to switch to a different industry or trying to switch to a different function or trying to switch to something that is completely new on all sides. That's certainly in the back of people's minds or in the front of their minds when they're applying to business school. So what we've got today is we have 5 current MBA students and a recent graduate who have all succeeded in making a career switch through the course of their MBA or in the process of making that career switch during their summer internships right now. So what we're going to hear from them is what has that process been like for them? How has their strategy changed, if at all, entering business school versus now? And any sort of tips and tricks that they are going to have for both your application strategy and then also for actually getting the job. So what we're going to do first is I am going to go in order of at least how your little heads are appearing on my screen. So if we could just start with just sort of say your name and what school you go to, and then which pre-MBA career you were in, and then which post-MBA career you are working towards, switching towards. So Frank from Fuqua, we could start with you.
Yeah, welcome. My name is Frank. I actually currently go to Duke's Fuqua Business School. Pre-MBA, I spent about 5 years in the Army. And then I came in, I'm actually currently entering strategy consulting.
Great. Mara from Sloan.
Hi all, my name is Maura Fitzsimons. I'm currently a student at MIT's Sloan School of Management. Prior to coming back from my MBA, I spent 5 years working in health policy, the bulk of which was spent in the public sector at both the Department of Health and Human Services and the US Senate Finance Committee. But I am currently 3 weeks into my internship at Salesforce, which has been fabulous so far, and I'm planning to stay in tech after graduation as well.
Also, Mara, real quick, what function are you doing in Salesforce this summer?
Sure. I am in a customer success role.
Wonderful. Thank you. Olamide, how are you from McCombs? You're next.
Okay, so I'm Olamide, and my experience before business school was in the utility sector. I was an operations manager, and currently I'm in my 5th week of my internship, and I'm going into program management at Microsoft, and I hopefully hope to do that post-graduation.
Excellent. And so Olamide, just to be sure, you did not have any software. Did you have a software background, or this is really a pretty big pivot for you?
Oh yeah, so I have a degree in electrical engineering, but I don't have any software background. So.
Okay, I mean it's close, but it's still quite a bit of a switch. Thank you. Next, Nisha from Foster.
Hi everyone, my name is Nisha. I just wrapped up my first year at Foster School of Business at University of Washington. My background is in chemical engineering, and I worked for 5 years in manufacturing as a process engineer before coming into my MBA, where I'd initially hoped to stay maybe in operations management or something similar. Made a big pivot, and I'm looking forward now to an internship at Goldman Sachs in private wealth management this summer.
Yes, another big pivot. These stories are great. Wonderful. So finally, we've got Julianne from CBS.
Hi, I'm Julianne. I just graduated from Columbia Business School. Before business school, I was working at Louis Vuitton in luxury retail supply chain and operations management. And post business school, I will be becoming a management consultant for Alex Partners.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, thanks so much for those introductions, everyone. So I think one of the big questions, let's start with the application process, right? Because I think most of the people tuning in today are either getting ready to apply or are thinking about applying. And so I think one of the first questions I'd like to ask is, when you applied, was this what you wrote about doing? I mean, obviously, if you didn't know this is what you were going to do, then you couldn't have written about it. But for the purposes of your application, when you were approaching the career vision portion of your application, how did you approach it at the time? Just so that way we know what your story was going in, and then we can talk a little bit about how things evolved from there. So who wants to, I think all of you have pretty good insights on this. So I'll start with Frank again and then move around.
Yeah, so for me, it actually came down to the job first. When I applied to my MBA, I didn't actually know what an MBA was. I'm an immigrant, so like my parents didn't go to school in the US either. So I realized that consulting for me was a place that took the best parts of what I liked in the Army, and also put it in a place where like I saw more of a return, both financially and also personally. Like you get to see the effect of what you're doing a lot faster than you do in the government side. So once I realized what I needed to do to get there, that's when the MBA came into picture. The advice I would definitely give people whenever you're writing about what you want to do, whether it changes when you're an MBA or not, is that story needs to make sense regardless of what you put down. You can't just say that you want to go get an MBA to go join consulting and not give a reason of how you came, what conclusion did you actually get to that place. If you're able to do that eloquently, it doesn't matter what your background is. It'll get you to where you are, but just make sure that the things that you have learned up to the point that you apply to should add up to you being a better consultant or working in tech, or like that you're actually bringing skills that are diverse enough that are going to make you a plus, and not worry so much about the things that like I have zero experience in consulting before I started right now. So that's not what held me back. What holds people back is that you don't know how to sell yourself properly.
And I'm guessing, Frank, when you were selling yourself to the Duke admissions board, were you talking about, I'm guessing, like leadership? You know, in the military, often people get tremendous amounts of leadership at a pretty young age. Was that some of what you?
Yeah, I focused a lot on not only the leadership part, but the teamwork part, and the diversity part. Like I had very diverse teams. Also, like the size of teams that I managed were relatively large for someone my age. Like I focus a lot on the complex environments and the problem solving. And once again, it's easier, I think, if you kind of anchor yourself to a career that the MBA will get you to. It doesn't matter once you're in. You can obviously change and see what's around, like I'm sure people on this panel have. But if you can see what skills are important for that career, I would backtrack from that into your MBA application and see what skills you already have. Almost like creating a little matrix to being like, hey, I already have these intangible skills, even though I never worked in this industry. And then write your story from there.
Wonderful. That's great advice. Thank you. Mara, you're next. What did you apply with?
When I was writing my application essays and thinking about where I wanted to go to school, I was really focused on healthcare. As I mentioned, I was in health policy, and when I was working with different stakeholders on the Hill, I was always curious about what their strategic and operational challenges were, and that's really was the biggest indicator for me that I maybe didn't want to be in the policy field, but wanted to be on the ground making those decisions. And so that was a really natural narrative for me to explore and to write in my essays. However, as from the point I submitted my application through almost the year and a few months after that, I started to open myself up to just other opportunities, and realized that when I wasn't inundated and in the weeds in healthcare every day, and maybe I was interested in other things more so than strictly healthcare. And so for me, it was definitely, I think, a very coherent story to tell. It was a very truthful story at the time, but definitely just adapted and changed as I thought more about it leading up to and in business school.
Was there one sort of moment or class or conversation that you had that sort of had that little light bulb moment for you where you thought maybe tech is what I want to do and not healthcare? Or was it a lot of things?
I think it was a lot of things. It was more that when you show up on campus from day one, it feels like you're inundated with different clubs, recruiting events, activities. And I just found myself, I was not prioritizing the healthcare events. I was more drawn to the other events that I was more interested in and wanted to think about. And so it was a very natural change. Admittedly, when I was recruiting, I did still throw in some applications in the healthcare field, but I didn't feel like my heart was in it as much as it had been even 6 months or a year prior.
That's great. That's a great data point. If you don't find yourself, when you do have the option to explore other things, you don't find yourself going back to healthcare as your first choice, maybe that's a pretty good sign that something is brewing in your head. Olamide, what about you? What did you write in your application? How did things evolve?
Okay, so in my application, I wrote that I wanted to go into strategy consulting or corporate strategy. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do that was a large part of my work experience was actually with a startup company. And as the company was growing, I got to get my hands in across all the functions in the company. But then I felt like I was really restricted because I worked in a small company and I wanted to get experience across industries. So I felt consulting would give me that opportunity. Or if I wasn't going to do consulting, I actually wanted to just be in a role that allowed me to be able to think more strategically for the company rather than just working on tactical projects. So I got to business school and I started the whole process of networking for consulting and going on career tracks. Then I did the Microsoft case challenge and I started getting exposed to the Microsoft product and started realizing that even working at Microsoft, I can actually get that same experience across industries, and I still have the opportunity to be able to work on different things, and I'm not really siloed into just a role. So I went on to Microsoft. I went to Microsoft. I visited Microsoft, got to talk to more people, and I started realizing that tech might actually be a good fit for me. And also the fact that I just realized I prefer the work-life balance that tech offers too. So I just chose to stick with tech and stop recruiting for consulting.
That's great. When you were recruiting for consulting, how was that process? And did you do it like you really went far in the process, or you came to this realization that tech was a better fit pretty early on?
I went through it, and then I got my offer for tech pretty early too. I got it around November. So it was just before consulting. The applications for consulting started, and I submitted about one or two, and then I had to start talking to everyone that I networked with to let them know that I didn't want an interview because I already had an offer that I really wanted to take, and there was no need for them to give me an interview. Okay, so I stopped there.
All right, great, thank you. Nisha, what was your application about?
Yeah, so
Nisha, you're
coming from an engineering background. Oh.
I thought you were on mute, but you're not. Sorry.
Is my mic working?
It is now.
Coming in, you're fine. I had been promoted to senior engineer right when I started thinking about going back for my MBA and started taking on more management responsibilities, started sitting in meetings with higher level management, started being able to see some of the strategy and decision making going on behind the scenes, and realized that was what I was more interested in pursuing going forward. Was not staying in a very technical career path, but being involved more in the business and in the higher level, high impact work. And so came back from my MBA initially thinking only about, management track, potentially staying in operations, but just knowing I needed more foundations. I had no business background, no formal management training, and knew I would need that no matter what. And then obviously things changed drastically, just between classes, clubs, similar to Maura, the events that I started prioritizing, just fell in love with finance, talked to as many people as I could, really researched as much as I could, and now have pivoted into a drastically different direction.
That's great. What can you pinpoint a particular moment where you were like, actually, finance is what I want to do, like, or no? It was just an evolution?
I would say very similar to Maura, like a lot of things. I loved my core finance class, loved participating in the Finance Society, which we have here at Foster. Again, just realized I was going to as many finance events as I could and really enjoying that the most. And the people that I met, really loved everyone I met working in the finance industry, both in corporate finance and in the financial, pure financial sector. Just started naturally gravitating that way.
That's great. So I think that's also good advice, not only to pay attention to which events you want to go to, but also I think this is an important thing for anyone entering a business school program. Keep an open mind when you start those required classes that first year, because you're going to get through that core curriculum a pretty broad viewpoint of lots of different business functions. And if you go in being like, well, I'm not a finance person, you might miss out on a great opportunity to find something you really love. So thank you for sharing that, Nisha. Julianne, you're up next.
So I actually applied to Columbia Business School twice. So those of you going through the application process, I've been through it twice. I know how tough it is. The first time I applied to business schools, I had applied thinking I wanted to stay in luxury retail and pivot from an operations function to more of a marketing, product management type function. And then I didn't get into CBS, which was my top choice school. I got into a few other programs, and I got cold feet with some of those other programs. One was specific in luxury brand management. It would have been amazing for what I thought I wanted to do. And I think that kind of internal feeling of, oh, I don't know if I want to close off every other option was a good signal that I had to re-examine what I was doing and why, and really think if I wanted to use this opportunity of getting an MBA to explore other things. So when deciding to whether to reapply for the next cycle, I decided to kind of reevaluate what I wanted to do. Consulting had been something that sounded interesting to me for quite a while. I had a couple coworkers who had gone on to consulting jobs after LV, and I thought maybe, that could be something that's open to me. So I started exploring that path a lot more. And then when I reapplied, I was clear that I wanted to do consulting.
And so, Julianne, when you reapplied, did you mention those other people? Like, oh, I had 3 other coworkers and they've all gone on to consulting, and so that's how I know it's what I want, and that's how I know it's feasible? Or did you include that at all?
I'm not sure if I mentioned those other people specifically, but something that I did mention was a tool that I had used for my undergrad. I went to the University of Michigan undergrad, which had incredible career services available to us as alums. And so one of those is called Career Leader, which I think a lot of MBAs also take before they even start the MBA program. And I had taken that as an undergrad, and I thought, I'd really like to take that again and see what it kind of spits out for me and what it suggests. And I think that really confirmed that the job I was in was not necessarily meeting the things I was thinking about that I wanted out of my career. And that kind of helped me feel more comfortable. It helped put some numbers behind what I was thinking about. So that was one of the things that I mentioned in my essay, actually.
Oh, great. Yeah. I'm a huge Career Leader fan. When I first took Career Leader, when I started my business school program, it told me it was like, you're going to be an entrepreneur. And I was like, psh. And it was like, and you really value mentoring. And I'm like, what? But mentoring doesn't, that doesn't pay the bills. I don't like you, Career Leader. You didn't tell me, I wanted you to tell me that I should go into, hedge funds or something. And I wasn't happy with my answers, but it was so right. Like now, I graduated 15 years ago, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, Career Leader was totally spot on. Like everything it told me about myself was true. So that's really cool that you took it. And also that you mentioned it, right? That I think that really helped show the admissions committee that you had done the soul searching and the self-analysis and reflection necessary to make that switch.
And if you're a numbers-driven person, it's a great tool too. If you feel like, you don't quite trust your gut instinct, you want to see some numbers behind it, it's kind of a fun way to sort of see what might fit.
And it also throws out all these things that you might not have thought of otherwise too. Like for me, I literally had never thought of myself as an entrepreneur ever, until it was like #1 choice. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Okay, so that's great. Okay, so I think one question that's coming in, and this is especially for those of you who are making the bigger switches, something where you had no previous experience, in making that jump. Did you have a harder time, you think, securing the internship? Or did you focus when you were applying? Did you say like, look, I know I bring something to the table. It might not be exactly what you guys are looking for. It might, maybe I've never done product management at a tech company before, but I've done this other stuff that is very close to it. Did you focus on that as part of your recruitment story, or what other sort of strategies did you use, especially if you didn't have a lot of previous experience? And I think we'll go, your little faces moved in a different order now, but I'm going to go in the previous order that I had before. So Frank, I think especially since you said before we went live, everyone, Frank was like, yeah, I used to blow things up for a living. And so surprisingly enough, that's not literally useful in corporation. So how about, what did you do, Frank? How did you make that switch?
Yeah, that was definitely where I had coming into an MBA. But I think what I would share with everyone is that MBA programs are career switchers by nature. So recruiters that are coming to your program are aware of this. They're not looking for someone that just came out of strategy consulting to go back into strategy consulting. They're actually coming and fishing for that diversity of backgrounds. I would tell you that they're more concerned about how you think than they are about what you used to do. So if you're coming to an MBA program from a career that has nothing to do with what you want to do, just showcase a lot more of how you used to think in your old job when you're talking to recruiters, when you're interviewing, to show them that like, hey, this is how I used to think about problems, regardless of whether they have anything to do with what I'm about to do now. Because that's the kind of diversity they're looking for. That's how you get the best problem solvers. That's how you build the best teams, regardless of industry. So don't worry so much about, hey, I don't have 7 years of experience in this one particular field I want to go into. I'd be more worried about getting your story down of this is the things that I learned in the last 7 years. And this is where I think I'll actually be very helpful to you, to your firm, to your company, to whatever I want to do because of that.
That's great. Exactly. It's a sales pitch. It's a marketing exercise. Just like applying to school is a marketing exercise, telling your employer, like, here are the things I bring to the table, is a valuable piece of advice. Anyone else? Mara, do you have a?
I'd also like to add really quickly, like, I think like the question geared towards, was it more difficult? Absolutely not. Like across the vets, we did really well. For vets tend to go consulting a lot. It's like our primary career track. They did incredibly well. We recruit really well. So it is not an issue and you shouldn't be concerned with it.
All right. Excellent. Okay. Mara, did you have a similar?
Sure, I can talk to this. I would definitely echo Frank's point about the importance of having your story down pat and being able to tailor it to different firms. I know for my recruiting process, I was a bit more across the board, where some were earlier stage startups, others were sales forces that are obviously very mature. And so being able to tell my story and why I fit into different organizations was really important. I do think I probably came into the MBA thinking it would be a bit easier to totally pivot careers. And I found that while I think the MBA is the place to be if you want to change careers, you do have to have, I had to have reset my expectations, where I had to think through, it might be possible for me to either change industries, but it might be harder to change industries and change roles and job functions at the exact same time at a big firm. So you might be, if you want to think through, it might be hard to jump right into product marketing, say at Google, but you could do that at a smaller startup. And so I think that's just one example, not to say it's impossible, but definitely think through, if that Google or other Apple internship doesn't pan out for you, then think through, what are some other companies that I would also be interested in working at, where I could get experience in that role or that industry.
And that's also a really good point, because first of all, it's, in terms of careers, it is a marathon, not a sprint. I know everyone says that all the time. It's a really overused phrase, but it's overused because it's true, right? So I think everyone, even for you guys, since you are sort of, either in the middle of your MBA or just about to graduate, just keep in mind, you can always start doing one thing and then 5 years later, switch to something else, 2 years later, switch to something else. I have a friend from business school, for example, who was doing product management, kind of a technical management role. And she just switched to marketing a few years ago. And now she was named the CMO of a software firm. And so it's you don't have to have it all figured out right now. So that's another thing that I would want to share. Wait, who was next afterwards? I think it was Amide.
Olamide.
Oh, Olamide, sorry.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out, I was trying to juggle a lot of things in my head at once. Okay, Olamide, sorry. So I think you were next in the.
So literally, Frank took the words out of my mouth. But I think what I'm going to add to that would be the fact that something else you need to think about is not just your approach to solving problems, but you need to think about the culture of the company too, because they're not just taking you for the skills that you bring, but they want to be sure that you're a culture fit. And you need to be able to show them that your values align with their own culture, or the things that you want to achieve and the impact you want to make aligns with their own vision for what they want for their organization. And you need to learn to be able to tell your story in that way, so that they can actually picture you or imagine you working with them in that role. So even if you don't have the skills, they feel like, yes, we can bring you on and you have the ability to learn, and you would be willing to want to collaborate with other people rather than just being on your own. So if you're going to go to a Microsoft, for instance, you can't go there telling your story and not talking about how you learned from your mistakes, or and not talk about how you collaborated in a team. You have to be able to show those kind of skills, so that it makes it a lot easier to convince them that you'll be a good fit for a role, even though you haven't done anything similar to it previously. So I would say that is the most important thing I can add to that.
So that's great advice. It's also important to choose a firm where you are a good cultural fit, because that way you're more likely to do well in that firm and to advance if you are a good cultural fit going in. Just real quick, Olamide, when you were applying to Microsoft, I am not familiar with sort of the product. You're doing product management? Do I remember correctly?
Program management.
Program management. That's it.
Yeah.
So when you were applying for that, did the application process how did it ask you for like, did you have to, was it just interviews, or did you have to like fill out anything explaining how you thought your previous experience matched?
It was just the interview. It was just the interview. So
Okay.
it was more about learning to tailor my stories to be able to sell their value. So when they asked me questions about how I solved the problem, I remembered not to just talk about my approach, but be able to show things that aligned with their culture or their ways of doing things. Like, they don't want you to just sit on your own trying to figure out a problem. They expect you to reach out to people to ask for help when you're trying to figure out things. So I made sure that I was able to highlight those things in my story and not just get to the end of my story, how I solved the problem. So I feel like those are the things that make the difference, because that is when they can actually picture you working on their team and they know that you'll be able to thrive as an employee there.
That's great. Wonderful. Okay, Nisha, you were making quite a switch. Did you tell them about your ability to do organic chemistry, and they were like, "Yep, wealth management, done."
Yeah, it was very different. I think a lot of great advice has already been given by those who went before me. Definitely aligning your stories and picking out what from your previous experience matches. So I talked about, even though I come from an engineering background, I found that a lot of my success came from being able to build relationships and knowing who to communicate with, knowing who the stakeholders in my projects were, making sure that I had buy-in, how I was able to persuade upper management for buy-in on projects, things like that. There's usually a lot more experience that you can use in pivoting than you think you can. So don't, forget about your old job as soon as you go into the MBA. Make sure you stay aware of all the work you did, all the connections you formed, because a lot of that can be used and told in different ways that, as others have said before me, match the company's cultures or goals or skills that they value, even if on the surface they don't appear to. I think I would add, oh, sorry. Okay, one more thing real quick, is when I was making such a big pivot, honestly, the first stage for me was going in under a low pressure situation. So for me, shameless plug for Foster, we have a very small program. We're very close between the first years and second years. And actually, how I first started thinking about such a big pivot was talking to a couple second years who work in the financial sector. They were the first ones to connect me with others in their network. They're the ones who kind of saw that potential trajectory in me and thought, hey, you could be really good at this. So talking to other students, maybe who don't have the initial pressure of going to talk to a professional right away and trying to network right away in a sector you're unfamiliar in, is a good way to kind of talk out some of those uncertainties or insecurities before you go to sell yourself, at a higher level. That really helped me get some of my stories straight, work out, how is this relevant? How can I use this and tell this to show that I would be a good fit? That really helped me. I definitely would not be here today without help from other students.
And you were probably also refining your pitch along the way too. Like,
Absolutely.
at first I thought it was this, but maybe I should focus more on the ability to convince powerful people to do things like give me their money, for example.
Exactly. There's a lot more that you can have inside of you than you think. And sometimes it helps to have other people point that out to you.
That's great. Wonderful. Julianne, do you have something to add? I'd love to hear.
I mean, I could echo everything that's already been said already. There was a lot of great wisdom that the other four panelists already shared. Something that I was thinking about when, everyone's going back.
Is she frozen, or am I the one who's frozen?
I was frozen. I saw my little
wheel. There you are. Okay.
Think about the kind of common threads between what you were doing before and what you liked about that. I think people always want to hear people who are positive about their experiences. So when
Oh no. Julianne, come back. Come back to us, Julianne. Okay.
Okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Coming from operations to consulting, there was still an analytical element, a problem-solving element that I could still highlight that was, something I liked about my past. So just think about those things that you liked about your prior experience. You can always leverage that when networking and interviewing.
That's great. And so for you, Julianne, when you were doing the switch into consulting, what strategy did you use? Did you start, I guess, did you join the consulting club? Did you start networking? Did you do on-campus recruiting, or did you do sort of a more tailored networked job search?
Definitely on-campus recruiting. But just because the companies are coming to campus doesn't mean that you don't have to kind of put in the legwork. I definitely spoke to a lot of current students, former students. We had somebody come speak on a panel who had a retail background as well. And I thought, oh, this is someone with a similar background who's working with one of these companies. I'll reach out to her. So finding people who you have those things in common with can help make, I think, more meaningful connections. And just because, on-campus recruiting, just because they're coming to campus doesn't mean it's easier necessarily. It's still a lot of work. It's just a different process. But you should definitely still leverage your own kind of networking skills when going through OCR.
Yeah, and I think that's good to know, because I do think sometimes people look at the list of recruiters who come to campus and they think, well, if I get into this school, that means all of these recruiters are going to want me. and so how am I going to choose between them, when really, like, the OCR or the career services or Office of Career Services or whatever they're called, they can help for sure. But at the same time, like, the firms do need to pick amongst many qualified students for those jobs. So yeah, so it's definitely, I think, more work than perhaps people at the application phase think it is going in. Okay, well, are there what limitations did you encounter in making the career switch, if any? Were there any, or maybe you or some friends, if you don't want to talk about yourself, if you have any friends perhaps who were really, really trying to make a switch into something, let's just say private equity or venture capital, which are kind of some famous ones that a lot of people are interested in and that are sort of famously difficult to get. Like, did you have any friends who maybe weren't able to make that switch? And if so, what do you think we could learn from those examples? I know I didn't think of this question before, but it just occurred to me, and I'm like, I kind of want to know. Olamide, yes.
I think I can take that, because I think one of the things I found to be difficult for people to do is actually switching functions rather than switching industries. I feel like it's a lot easier for you to switch industries, but I've seen people find it very hard to get product manager roles. It's one of the things I feel is harder than even, I know wealth management is hard, but I feel like the people that are focused on getting finance jobs end up getting them. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. But most of the people that try to get product manager roles usually feel like getting it. And I think that one of the reasons is the fact that they expect you to have some form of product management work experience, or you're able to tailor your story or tell your story in such a way that you're able to show that you really understand what product management is all about. And the best advice I would give people that are interested in product management is, it might not be possible for you to get product management work experience before you go for your MBA and during your MBA, but it makes a lot of sense for you to maybe just take a Udemy course or some other course on product management. Try to really understand what it is about and try to learn how you can tailor your story to be able to talk about empathy and talk about everything that is about product management, to sell your story so well, to convince them to be able to give you that role. Because I've seen people be successful at getting it without that experience. And I've seen people that even had product management experience failing to be able to do it when they were switching from between industries. So I think that would be the best advice I would give for that.
And that's great advice, right? Because sometimes it can feel like a chicken and egg problem. Like, well, we won't give you the job unless you have experience, but how do I get experience if you won't give me the job? So what am I supposed to do? And so at least if you take like some Udemy classes or something like that, you can at least talk the talk when you get into the interview to give yourself a fighting chance to show that you know what they're talking about. That's really great advice.
And if worst case scenario, you're not able to get that, then maybe get a role with the organization you're passionate about working for, and then find a way to be able to network to get to what you want.
Try to eventually kind of work your way in there. Great. Does anyone have any other thoughts? Frank, yes.
So I can speak to the private equity venture capital side because that is an ultimate goal of mine. It is very similar to what was just discussed. You have to know the steps that it takes to get to those roles. And sometimes for someone like me that I've never worked in the banking side of private, like I've never done that, I have that experience. There was just no way I was going to go directly into it. Now, what you want to do to be able to get to these roles is kind of understand what the pathways to the industries are and seeing how the MBA gets you closer. But you have to be aware that a private equity venture capital job is only going to go to people getting an MBA that have experience and connections in those roles already. So they might have come from banking as an analyst for a couple of years before, and they have those connections to make. There's very few programs out there, even top programs, that have a direct path into private equity and venture capital. So that requires a lot more of your own work of like, how do you want to get there, and making sure that whatever program you want to go to actually gets you closer. The limitations that I found are a lot more on the side of, similar to what Olamide just said, is like, hey, sometimes they want you to have the experience and the MBA, but you might have come from an industry where that experience was just not there. So I agree with her advice a lot. Like, if you're just inching closer to your dream job and the MBA helps you get there, then take that route. And keep your mind open, because like for me, I knew how little I knew about business working for the Army for 5 years. So I came into this with the idea that I knew very little, and I was going to be open to, I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but you really do have to be open to whatever's out there, because there's so much work and there's so many cool things being done in the world right now that an MBA can get you to.
Right, exactly. And I think especially for someone who doesn't have a very strong business background prior to business school, looking for those post-MBA roles that will expose you to a broad range of things like consulting could be really great, right? Because since you're sort of newer to the business world, whatever that means, at least with consulting, you will be on different projects. And so you'll start to get more of a sense of like, I do like this, I don't like that. So I think that's a really smart way to go. I also have a funny, one thing is when people always lump together VCPE, like they sort of say it in one breath, like I want to work in VCPE. Like those are actually two very different, like investing in early stage companies that are often pre-revenue or have very little revenue is very different from investing in a company that has $20 million in revenue and is trying to turn things around. So I often tell people, first of all, I tell people when they're applying, please don't say that unless you have the relevant experience, because it's really hard to get that job if you don't have something relevant, really directly relevant in the past. But I also say, like, don't just lump them together. Like, be thoughtful about, for your application strategy at least, do you prefer early stage, more uncertainty, greater risk but greater reward, or are you more like an incrementalist where I'd rather take a company that's making $20 million and then make it $25 million as opposed to a company that is making $0 and try to get it up that sharp curve. So that's just a little tip that if anyone on this chat is interested in either one of those fields, just I think be aware of the fact that they're kind of different phases of investment. Okay, anyone else have? No? All right, well, so I think we're sort of reaching the time limit. So what kind of final words of encouragement or advice would you guys have for someone watching this, looking to go to business school? And then also, I think either words of advice or like, if there's one thing you could have done differently, maybe prior to applying, prior to enrolling, like what would you have done maybe differently that might have made things a little bit faster or easier, or you wouldn't change a thing perhaps? Let's go around. Okay, Olamide, yes.
Okay, so I can take that. So I think one of the things that I wish I did differently was before the application process, I would always tell people that if you have an idea of, if you're confused about what you want to do post MBA or what you want to write in your essay, then the best thing for you to do is start reaching out to people in the school, start reaching out to the alumni, start talking to people in those roles that you think you're interested in to really understand what they require. So you're able to write in your essay and understand what value you already have and what skills you're trying to build to get to where you want to be. And the thing about that is you shouldn't end that conversation after you submitted your application. You continue those conversations, because especially if you want to go into consulting, like start those conversations even before you get in, because you start that journey with people you've been talking to before your application and you've already built that relationship with them. So by the time you get to school, it doesn't feel like, you don't feel stressed out with trying to balance coursework and networking at the same time. because that's like the biggest challenge when it comes to recruiting for consulting, aside from casing too. And so when you don't struggle with doing all those things because you actually started that process really early, and it just feels like the coursework just became an addition to the things you had been doing previously. So when you have all those conversations, then recruiting becomes a lot easier. You're not getting into business school and you're still trying to explore. It's good for you. It's okay if you get in and you're still trying to explore, but you can actually make your life a lot easier for yourself if you start exploring before school starts. You start having those conversations, because you don't know when you're going to get the opportunity to sit down in front of someone or get an interview, and you don't want to blow that opportunity. So if you've been having those conversations, then you really understand your value and you really understand what you're trying to get yourself into, and you're able to tell your story very well to be able to convince them to give you a job offer. So that would be the key advice I would give.
And there were two great things in what you just said. I think number one, first of all, talking about just how hectic the classes are. I think sometimes people, in applying to business school, they forget that, hey, it's school. Like, you will have classes. Yeah. Like, you're not just going to show up and recruit. Like, you're actually going to have homework and tests and papers. Like, there's a lot to do on the school side of business school. And also, you mentioned something, casing, a second ago. Given that so many people going into business school are interested in management consulting, for those of you who might be sort of new, casing means when you're applying, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but when you're applying to management consulting jobs, there are sort of two different types of interviews. One is a more standard, tell us about your history, tell us about problems you've solved in the past. But then the other one is case study type interviews, where you will be presented with a problem or a data set or something along those lines, and you need to make sense of that data and come up with a recommendation. And that is often mentioned as one of the biggest hurdles in getting through the consulting interview. So specifically to consulting, my three consultants, do you have any specific advice regarding casing? Like, when should you start preparing for casing? Is it overkill to start early, or what do you think? Frank, I saw you raise your hand first.
So this might be a hot take advice, but please do not start casing before you are told to start casing.
Okay.
There's a lot of people out here that are going to be like, I'm going to pick up management consulting casing books. I'm going to grab a case in point and memorize it. Yeah. You're going to burn out. You're going to sound like a robot. Everyone that did that was not successful. The majority of them did not get where they wanted to go. Trust the programs you got into. You probably selected them for a reason. A lot of it's going to be the people you meet, and trust that program knows what they're doing. Especially if you're going the consulting track, like most likely the second years are going to help you out. You're going to learn from our mistakes. But don't be those people that like came in and be like, I've already done 100 cases, because there's an art to casing for an interview. And it requires, for me in particular, and this is advice from someone that didn't even know what a case was when I showed up to business school. You have to be yourself, even while you're doing a very structured problem. And the more you try to case and memorize and do formulas in your head and like think you figured it out, the more you're going to sound like every other person that walked into that door and did the same thing. Remember that they're looking for you to actually be an individual and someone that's going to contribute to a team in a very diverse way. They're not looking for someone that memorized all the casing books and can just do fast math. The people that do that don't tend to be very successful, because at the end of the day, consulting as an MBA is about networks. It's about building relationships with clients. They need you to be smart, but they need you to be better at being with people and showcasing that you are someone they want to be in a room with. So please do not start casing this summer. Do not start casing until it's absolutely necessary. Like, you'll be fine. We all did it, and it'll work out.
That's great. Wow. Thanks, Frank. Olamide, yes.
So just before Julianne says something, because I know I didn't go through the full process, but I need to emphasize that, lean on the second years. Like, they know what they're doing. They've gone through that process. They just went through that process, and whatever they tell you, just do it. Don't question it. I'm serious. Like, just do it, because they're the ones that would help you to be able to get to where you want to be. I would say that one of the things that really helped me with my own recruiting for tech was the fact that I was casing and I was practicing the second years, and they're correcting me every time I'm casing with someone. I do a behavioral, and they're always correcting me for my mistakes. And it was all those corrections that really helps me. So I would say lean on the second years heavily. Don't run away from them. Don't think that they don't know what they're saying. They just went through that process and they know what they're saying. So I just wanted to emphasize that.
That's true. Julianne, you're also, you're going into consulting full time. What are your thoughts?
Yes, totally agree with everything about not starting too early and definitely relying on the second years, especially because if you recruit as a second year, there will be no third years there left for you. So they're only on campus for a short amount of time with you. So definitely leverage them when you have the opportunity. But it's, we already talked about it a little bit in reference to the application, but also, you mentioned behavioral interviews. It's never too early to be thinking about your story and the stories that you might want to tell in an interview. And when you're still in your job before business school is when you still have the time to fact check some of your stories, write down your numbers, and, put quantify things in your resume. They don't let you back in to look at the data once you quit. So it's definitely a good idea to start writing down some of those numbers and memories and facts now while it's fresh in your mind and while you can verify things with people, and even ask your coworkers, like, who know that you're going to be applying to something else. What are some stories about me that you think I could use?
Yeah, and that's useful for your application too, like you said. Like, you're going to need those stories anyway, so you might as well start now. Mara and Nisha, any final thoughts from you guys? I'll go Mara first.
Yeah, I totally agree with the advice given earlier about talking to as many people as possible. I would just add to that I think it'd be also fabulous to try and get some action and actually get your hands wet as well. And so if you can swing it, do an internship the summer before you go back to business school. I know that's not feasible for everyone, but if it is in the cards, I think that would be a great idea just to actually test out, do you actually like what you think you're trying to switch into? You can also take advantage of a number of programs on campus. I know Sloan has action learning labs. So during my first semester, while I was doing core, I was also working with a client throughout the entire semester that really gave me more of that private sector experience that I felt that I was lacking. And it also gave me a lot of new stories to talk to in my interviews come the spring. And so whether it's during that fall semester or during I know we have also January off from classes, so that's another time where a lot of students take advantage of that to do kind of a short internship. There are a lot of ways to explore new career opportunities and figure out what you actually like or don't like.
That's great. I didn't realize that you could start doing action learning labs in your first semester at Sloan.
Yes, yep. It's just one action learning lab. And then, of course, throughout the rest of your time, there's a number of others to choose from.
You can do more. Well, that's great. That does help you, because if you are recruiting sort of starting in that January, spring timeframe for the summer internship, you get that experience early. That's good. Smart. Sloan is so smart. Nisha, how about you?
I don't know that I have much to add. There's been so much good advice given already. One thing that I heard a lot from my second years, or when I was even incoming, the first and second years then, was a bit different maybe. So this is an individual journey. Each person should pick what works best for them. But I actually got advised, and wish I'd done a better job of, taking some time off before the program starts. A few weeks at the beginning of the summer or right before the program, but give yourself at least a couple weeks to just internalize the change you're about to go through, right? Maybe not doing as much like pressure on yourself or active classes or internships. Take a few weeks to just relax, do some self-reflection, think about, where you're coming from, where you want to go, just yourself, because once the program starts, you really hit the ground running. Your whole life will become the program, and recruiting and networking and classes and all of the above that we've just talked about for almost 50 minutes. So for me, having a little bit of time, a little bit of a mental break before you enter this program was very, very valuable. I wish I'd done a little more of it, actually. So again, it's a completely individual choice. Do you think you'll get more out of taking that one last course before the program starts? Completely up to you. But think about your mental health as well, and make sure you're going into the program in a good place.
Yeah, that's true, because it is going to be 100 miles an hour once you get there. Okay, well, those are all of my questions. So thank you, all of you guys, so much. I think these things that you've said have been super valuable. I actually didn't know that that starting casing early would be a bad idea. But your points were really, I was like, oh yeah, no, that's a really good point. I didn't think of that. So, and everyone's insights, I think, were just so valuable for our audience here today. So thank you, audience, for joining us here today. I actually just realized that I never introduced myself at the beginning. So super quick, I'm Maria Wickvila, and I am the founder of ApplicantLab.com, which is an online service that replaces the need for expensive admissions consultants. So if you are trying to think through your stories, as Julianne mentioned mentioned earlier, or if you're trying to think through how to structure that career vision so that it makes a lot of sense, check out Applicant Lab in my free trial. You can access some of my career visioning exercises to get started on your own best application story. So with that, I think we are done for today. Thanks again, everyone, and best wishes with your summer internships, post-MBA plans, and beyond. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.